centered. And you step outside and you will know what I mean. So welcome. Thank you for joining this session, co-hosted by Bentley Systems and CDRI, and with some amazing new inputs from Vedantix. But before I hand over for our opening remarks, just a bit of housekeeping. So we will finish just about 5:30. And then we've got a bit of time for informal drinks and just wrapping up the day. I still see folks taking a seat. Come join us. Yes, but come join us. Bring a friend. I'm looking to my own colleagues. Excellent. Well, this being said, I'm going to hand over to Marcia for opening remarks. So Marcia Toledo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Corina. Really good to be with you today. I hope you are surviving the heat wave. I'm barely doing that. So my name is Marcia Toledo. I am Director for Resilience and Human Development at the Climate Champions team. The Climate Champions team is a facilitator of the Global Climate Action Agenda, and this opening is especially connecting the mobilization of the action agenda, the opportunities to elevate progress, and especially inform how we can accelerate adaptation and resilience. And thank you for Bentley Systems, CDRI, and Vedantix for the opportunity of this session. And of course, as well, thank you everyone joining today, now in the room, but also online. And this conversation comes to a very important moment of the Global Climate Action Agenda. As we accelerate the journey towards COP31, we have 5 months of bringing together incredible stories in regards of solutions, innovation, technology shifts that can help especially ensure adaptation and resilience is at the center. And this year, we have an important continuity from the action agenda in regards of what was shaped and reflected last year in regards of responding to the global stocktake. So if you can imagine, the action agenda was framed or brought together to help deliver the Paris Agreement and especially recognize the contributions of non-state actors, business, cities, investors, civil society organizations. We want to make sure that those contributions are helping achieve what the global stocktake is saying. And what it's saying is we have been moving from commitments and pledges to implementation, but we still have enormous gaps on delivery. And that's the spirit of COP31 this year. COP31 presidency has put climate resilient cities as one of their top priorities. So perfect time to also reflect how the building and environment, construction, and resilient infrastructure sectors are critical to put adaptation and resilience at the center of climate action. I probably don't need to tell you this, that how critical is infrastructure, because community relies on energy, water, transport, healthcare, communication, etc. And that's actually why, considering that it's a sector that has many challenges or impacts of climate change, is also a very critical lever to accelerate the development or scaling solutions for adaptation and resilience. And as part of that as well, yesterday, the climate champion for COP31, Samed Erbash, released a vision statement where especially highlight how critical it is to put people at the center of climate action. Very much in one line, what the champion is bringing for the first time is climate action must save lives. If we really put people at the center, we recognize how innovations can actually improve the quality of life and resolve issues of the most challenging one. That is very critical. And in that sense, the good news is that the efforts being advanced, but many of you that are part of the action agenda, initiatives, coalitions, but also actors that are advancing plans to accelerate solutions, especially bringing that collective effort and addressing common gaps of implementation is what we see the discussion today can also help reflect. So it's really how can we scale? How can we identify those innovations that can bring from isolated results to more system transformation? So a question and a reflection that I hope you can see in this discussion is, how do we make resilience visible, measurable, and investable? How do we ensure that digital innovation translates into better decision-making, stronger systems, and outcomes that put people at the center? And that's why also important an opportunity to identify how these innovations on digital technologies, integrated data, predictable analytics, and life cycle intelligence can help us move from a reactive response to climate to a more anticipatory approach, an integrated approach where we can react, respond, and have a system that can actually help cope with risks. And in that sense, the opportunity is not looking again as technology as isolated or as a specific angle, silo angle, but the opposite, to see the full picture, the integration with other key areas, for example, on finance, on governance, and partnership that responds to local needs. So very excited to see this opportunity, how we working together can mainstream this type of solutions and bring this to the action agenda through your initiative, through the collaboration, so that it can help scale. So excited and really interested to see your input. Thank you. Back to you, Corina.
Thank you so much, Marsha, and thank you so much for that framing, because I think there's that link to the action agenda and the link to the agenda of the high-level champions that is really critical in the calendar. Like, actually, June is a very good moment to actually connect into plans for COP and into where is the conversation going. So the format for the session, we will have Priyanka from Vedantics sharing some key findings from the report. We've got the QR code on the side. So please scan it with your phone and have a look at the report. We'll then have a panel conversation. We've got Chris Bradshaw, who's CSO here at Bentley Systems, and we've got Raina Singh from CDRI, who will be with us online, magically appearing in that corner of the screen. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Priyanka from Vedantics, who will take us through the key findings.
Good evening, everyone. Let me start with a number, 8.3 million. Any guesses for what this number could be? Well, that's what extreme flooding could cause businesses in London to lose in a day, in a single day. And here's the thing, the flood doesn't even have to happen within the premises of these buildings. It can happen miles and miles away, at a substation, at a power station, at a part of network infrastructure that these businesses have not thought about. But still, the impact would be felt by all of them. The point is, the risk is not always where you think it is. It's always cascading, and that's a common thread in the research that I'm going to present today. I'm going to quickly take you through 3 things, a bit of background on what we did and why, the key findings, and I'm going to end with 4 recommendations. So why this report? Infrastructure resilience has shifted from being a long-term ambition to an immediate operational and strategic priority. It's driven by climate disruption, system complexity, rising service disruptions, and these aren't future concerns anymore. They're landing on operations, maintenance, engineering teams right now. To understand how firms are actually responding, Vedantics interviewed over 50 executives across energy, mining, transportation, and water, across North America, Europe, and APAC, all firms with revenues more than 250 million. We interviewed executives across operation and maintenance roles, engineering, IT and technology, and also C-suite across risk, finance, and strategy. So what did we find? The headline finding is this. So 84% of firms say they feel confident in their ability to manage resilience-related risks. Out of these 84%, so 32% said they have a mature strategy for infrastructure resilience. 52% of the firms have a developing strategy. That does sound very reassuring. But when you look at those firms and what they're actually doing, most are still responding to disruptions after they happen. predictive ahead of failure capabilities, the ones that would actually preempt those disruptions, remain rare. There's a real gap between confidence and capability, and that's what we found across this research. When you actually look at how they're managing individual hazards, the picture is uneven. The gap shows up mostly here. 76% of firms say climate disruption is a significant risk to their infrastructure. But then we have this. Storms and wind, 64% believe they're managing those well. Heat stress, 54%. Coastal surge, just 16%. Drought and landslide sit at about 32%. The hazards that are slower moving, more localized, less immediately visible, those are the ones that are actually left unmanaged. And they're exactly the kind of hazards that climate change is exacerbating. I have another number for you. The cost of that gap is not abstract. Globally, disaster losses now exceed $732 billion a year. And indirect economic costs from these disasters are 7.5 times higher. So when a substation floods and a hospital loses power and a supply chain shuts down, the cost of that cascades dwarfs the cost of actually fixing the substation. The real exposure is systemic. So why aren't firms moving faster? The first barrier is financial. 54% firms say competing priorities for limited budgets are their primary constraint. Supply chain pressures, energy volatility, sustained cost pressure, that's all meant that money is being pulled towards keeping today's operations running. Short-termism. Resilience keeps losing the fight for funding. Part of that reason is also that without clear data on what these disruptions actually cost to an individual firm, it's very hard to build a business case for preventing them. And that creates a self-reinforcing problem. You don't have a clear business ROI because you don't have clear data. You don't have clear data, so you don't have business ROI. While financial barriers are obviously very important, our research also found out that between financial, technical, and governance barriers, technical barriers were the biggest constraint. So 38% of firms actually ranked them as the most important barrier, and it shows up in 3 interconnected ways. 36% of firms identify fragmented data as the most significant technical barrier, with a further 32% selecting siloed systems. Fragmented data and siloed systems, so data scattered across operations, asset management, engineering, and external sources with very little integration between them. Cross-department misalignment, it's a governance thing, but it also shows up in technical ways. Engineering, operations, IT, and risk teams each run on different priorities and different data environments. A governance barrier that reinforces and is reinforced by technical barriers. Even when digital tools are deployed, they tend to be limited to specific teams, specific purposes, specific use cases, specific functions, making it very hard to get a system-wide view of risk and how it compounds. But here's the genuinely encouraging part. I am not all doom. Where digital tools are being used, they're working. Planning accuracy is up, asset uptime is up, redesign and rework costs are down. The most mature AI use case right now is inspection and defect recognition, which about half of the firms we surveyed have deployed at least partially. But the more advanced capabilities, so scenario simulation, what-if analysis, autonomous decision support, these are still in early stages. And one point to note is that even for the most advanced AI use cases, less than half the firms have partial network coverage, so it hasn't scaled yet. So what should firms actually do? The research points to 4 clear shifts. First, treat resilience as a life cycle priority, not a reactive operational fix. This means embedding it from design to operation and decommissioning, not really responding just when something breaks. We're already seeing firms with more mature strategies shifting from operational resilience towards enterprise-level business continuity, aligning technical, financial, operational, and climate risk insights with executive priorities. Second, break down data silos. Connect operational climate, hazard, and asset data across the full life cycle. You can't manage risk you can't see. And right now, most firms cannot see across their network and their own systems. We have an example in the report of Par China Henan, and it actually shows what's possible when the integration happens. So a power utility firm in China, it has combined terrain data, flood models, BIM, and sensor monitoring to enhance flood risk assessment for critical substations. This unified resilience platform has led the firm to achieve clearer disaster prediction, more informed planning, and improved resilience to extreme weather events. Third, shift from asset level to system level resilience. Build the network visibility to understand interdependencies and cascading impacts. This wider system level perspective is essential to anticipate large scale disruptions, including climate events. Prioritize interventions and strengthen resilience across entire infrastructure networks. Fourth, establish digital twins as the foundation. A single view or a single source of truth linking the physical and digital environment, enabling real-time proactive decisions across the full life cycle. It's not surprising, about 72% of firms we surveyed plan to increase their investment in digital twins in the next 24 months. The direction is clear. Which brings me to my closing thought. Resilience is no longer a question of awareness. Every room I've been in, awareness is high. It's a question of follow-through. The technology exists. The value is already being demonstrated in early deployments. What's needed now is the integration, the governance, and the investment to scale it system-wide. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we can go back to the slide with the QR code. We really invite you to scan it, download the report. Thank you, Priyanka. Would you like to join Chris? And then we can go to our panel. Also, to the audience, do prepare your questions. We've got a couple of rounds of questions, but if there's any thoughts or questions that you might have, we'll open the floor shortly. So really fascinating findings, and I was looking through the report, and there's so much richness in there and a lot to unpack. I think what's really interesting, Priyanka, you walked us through the findings. You're very, very close to the data and also to I guess, the companies and to the sort of the stories and the input that they were sharing. What would you say, was there anything that surprised you in there? Maybe we start with this. Was there anything that you went like, whoa, that's a shock?
I think I've had enough conversations to realize there's a gap between ambition and execution. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't going in expecting to be surprised. However, the 16% figure for coastal surge really surprised me. And I think I love to quote this one thing that Amartya Sen said when he was developing his famine theory. He says that the Indian middle class, upper class, and the polity would tolerate hunger every day, acute hunger, but tolerate it, but they would never let a famine break, because that's more acute, that's more visible, that's more undeniable. And I think it's kind of similar if you look at what kind of hazards are getting more attention. They're the ones that are more visible. And we're sitting in London, and we have a tidal barrier. And just imagine only 16% of firms in the world are thinking about coastal surge. Out of those, only 2% are actually saying they manage it at an expert level. So I think just how significant that gap is really surprised me.
That's really interesting, and we'll come back to that point in a second. I guess, Chris, a question from you. So we know that some of the tools and some of the recommendations that the report mentions as well are around this, how do we fix this fragmentation of data? And I really like the moving on from asset level to system level. I guess from Bentley's point of view, what do you think is holding back this adoption at scale? Is it business case? Is it investor criteria? Is it willingness to invest? What do you think is the holdback?
I think it's somewhat all of the above, to be perfectly honest with you. I think most organizations don't have their data organized in a way that lends itself to create a system view. And so that's a huge barrier. What they have are siloed systems that have siloed data standards, and they don't have a way to link them. And so people talk about CDE, we get all the technical stuff, digital twin, et cetera. But that is the technical barrier. Most of these organizations actually have a lot of the data that they need already. They just don't have it in a form that allows them to understand cascading challenges, et cetera. The other piece, if you get a little broader, is the energy company doesn't compare notes with the water company, doesn't compare notes with the comm company, right? So if you get to that level of systems, like if you're trying to handle a city scale kind of issue, you have a whole new set of interoperability challenges because, again, there's nothing there. One of the things I think that has made this more achievable, approachable, you see the companies that have had success, is that it's sort of ironic, but it's XYZ, it's location. So to the extent that these systems understand location about their assets and about where things are in the system, XYZ is unambiguous, right? It's a GPS coordinate. So I can visualize with a geospatial layer. I can then layer these systems on across one another and start to at least understand visually how they interact, so to speak. This is also a place, once you've got that kind of, whatever it is, whether it's location or something else, then you can start to apply machine learning and other AI to help you, because the other problem is you have so much data.
Yeah.
And now you have sensors that are sending data home, and it's just not possible for humans, really, honestly, to assess it. But it's really easy for AI to be gathering that information and to be able to really help, frankly, get insights that weren't possible before. And so I think that's the last thing I would say is organizations who've advanced to a high level have, in some cases, created capability that was impossible before. So, for example, water networks around the world all leak. And it's very difficult to find all the leaks because water flows downhill and it's hard to see where it's going, right? It's hard to know. You know how much water you put in, you know how much you get out, and you know you have a leak, but you don't know where. It turns out, if you have the right combination of sensors and you have AI, machine learning can tell you have leaks and where they are and how big they are. It's kind of a really cool example, I think, of capability that didn't exist before. So, and we're seeing that in a handful of water utilities in Brazil, for example, in Sao Paulo, others who have Singapore, who have implemented systems like that. So I think those success stories help people understand the power, because once you can do that, it changes how much you spend on doing inspections, for example. You may not have to roll as many field workers to do inspection because now you know where your failures are, and you can focus on then remedying those rather than doing inspections of parts of the system that are working just fine.
I think that's really interesting, and I think that speaks almost to some transition pains in a way. We're moving from older systems into newer systems, and there is a bit of a data bridge to create in terms of like how do we collect data now with modern sensors, with machine learning, predictive technologies, versus back in the day where you have field workers going and checking and writing on a notebook and logging that back in the system and connecting the dots. So maybe there's great potential in there that we can shorten that transition pain period in a way. Rainer, I want to go back to you. Welcome, thank you for joining us. I hope you can hear us okay. We can see you perfect.
Yes.
I guess a question to you specific to CDRI's vantage point. So we know that across the global south and disaster-prone geographies, resilience also fails at the network level. So we know about cascading risks and all the cross-dependencies between different types of infrastructure. I guess, what does that mean in terms of the coordination really needed between operators, local governments, national governments, and maybe also like the early warning or like other systems that might be in place? And I've got a follow-on question after that, but I'll ping this one first. Over to you.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Corina, and I hope you can hear me well.
Yeah, we can hear well.
All right, thank you. Thank you for confirming. Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to join virtually today and to co-host this co-organize this session together with Bentley. Let me start by congratulating Verdantix and Bentley on the survey and the thought leadership report. I think Priyanka was saying that no surprises there, but I think all the messages that have come out from the survey and the thought leadership report actually resonate very well with the work that we do at CDRI. And for those of you who may not be aware, we are a coalition of 57 countries and 12 organizations who are working on the mandate of resilient infrastructure systems. And actually, Corina, technologies and data is a focus area, key focus area of our work. So, to your question on whether a Go Digital prescription will work or not, I would say yes and no to this, because as part of our work, we know that digital integration and technologies are already transforming the way infrastructure systems are functioning, improving their efficiency, not just in day-to-day functioning, but also in the event of disasters and for response and recovery. So this is happening through the data value chain, improving connectivity, coordination, strengthening asset and network performance. So all these, there are a lot of cases that we are already seeing. So we just launched a global infrastructure resilience report from CDRI last November at COP13 Brazil, and technologies and data was a key area of focus in that report. And we did an extensive survey of 35 technologies as well, and several case studies. And what we found that there is a great potential for technological transformation in the context of resilience when we talk about infrastructure systems in terms of improving connectivity, communication. We are seeing connectivity platforms, mobile apps, social media, and collaborative dashboards, which are already supporting coordination between different kinds of stakeholders, including infrastructure agencies, operators, and government agencies. So in practice, what is happening that a stronger connectivity is translating into faster response, more transparent recovery, and faster recovery. But at the same time, what we also observed that digitalization alone is not enough, because coordination across operators and stakeholders, it requires much more than technology. And again, I would allude to Priyanka's presentation earlier, where she was talking about how life cycle approach is needed, and this is something that we have also found in our work. So resilience requires a whole system-wide approach where all these stakeholders can come together, whether it is in terms of building technical capacity, informing policy, decision making, so on and so forth. So which means that while that Go Digital prescription by itself is unlikely to address systemic resilience challenges. And maybe just I will end with one last point. In the context of technology, I think it's also important to keep in mind that there is a risk of widening gaps between diverse income geographies. So, for example, across infrastructure agencies and operators that come with different technical capacities, but also at the same time, we are seeing a lot of very high-end sophisticated technologies being deployed in high-income countries, which may not be so much feasible and cost-effective in the context of low and middle income countries, right? So, which means that digital transformation cannot occur on a level playing field. There would be differences of financial resources, technical capacity, skills, mandates, institutional maturity to be able to deploy and continuously adapt technologies in the context of an evolving scenario. So therefore, it's important to keep all these factors in mind, especially from from the perspective of a question on global south. If there have to be those enabling conditions for technology to be able to improve coordination in the context of infrastructure resilience. Let me pause here. Over to you.
Thank you so much. And you were already hinting at my next question, because I'm really interested in this point that you've brought up, that also the report talks about different types of infrastructure and the life cycle question. The needs and the realities are very different in different geographies. And maybe a question is, what would be maybe from your experience, from CDRI's work. But what do you think is the specific, or almost kind of like, how do we take this forward in terms of infrastructure yet to be built? And also not necessarily yet to be built maybe in a global north context, but what does that mean in resource-constrained context? You know, you were talking about data scarcity, you were talking about even like access to internet and like reliability and all of these challenges that we're facing. I'm just curious, like, what is your point of view on that, on future infrastructure? And I guess the infrastructure that maybe is being commissioned now, that maybe is already in pre-feasibility or feasibility. And, you know, there's loads of great folks working on building the bankability of those. But how do we make sure that they will actually be resilient by the time, you know, they actually get built 5, 10 years down the line? Not an easy question, but yeah, just pinging that over to you.
Yeah, let me try an attempt to answer that, Corina. So I think I'll build upon my last response and maybe highlight 2 points for now. The first being the focus on technology readiness when it comes to future infrastructure, rather than focusing or investing in only one or two high-end technologies. And this becomes extremely important because, like you said, and Priyanka also mentioned in her presentation, that there are these, you know, technical capacity gaps very much prevalent in the private sector as well, not just the public sector, right? So, and at the same time, we know that technologies are constantly getting upgraded. There are new technologies which are getting developed. So, you know, technology readiness from the perspective of institutions, from the perspective of private sector, from the perspective of practitioners and infrastructure professionals who are working in this space, helps ensure that future infrastructure is designed to accommodate evolving technologies while embedding resilience throughout its life cycle in a proactive manner. So what can be done and what it means? So, you know, I referred to the CDRI report earlier, and as part of the technology chapter, and I would encourage colleagues and participants to go back and read it if you are interested on this topic. So what you will find as part of the technology chapter, we have actually you know, outlined a technologies readiness checklist, which essentially helps organizations, agencies, and infrastructure operators to assess where they are with respect to technology readiness in terms of you know, aspects related to governance, in terms of strategic leadership, financial resources, sustainability, as well as, you know, institutional capacity and human capital. Also, another important point I think to mention here is the fact that when we talk about technologies readiness, there are related governance related aspects, in the sense, for example, a lot of time data, we look at data together with technology, right? Because that's very important for implementing and deploying a lot of technologies. But having the right standardized data, having it in the right formats, having data which is interoperable and usable, a lot of times it is actually more of an institutional and governance challenge rather than a technology challenge, right? So I think it is also something which needs to be considered, and therefore, you know, this technologies readiness checklist can actually help institutions and stakeholders assess where they are, so that they can take action now rather than requiring costly adjustment later. And the second point, maybe with which I want to leave you, is the fact that we need to focus equally on low cost and accessible solutions, not just very sophisticated and high end technologies, because, and this is especially important in the context of, you know, developing economies and low and middle income countries, for instance, because the point to keep in mind is that technologies are useful depending on the context, depending on the available resources, depending on institutional capacities. So resilience is not about choosing between a high-tech and a low-tech solution. What matters is choosing what is the right technology for you and what is the right technology that you can sustain. So in many contexts, very simple tools you know, can actually improve communication and coordination, rather than having very, you know, high-end, high investment requiring technologies. So I think that's the second point that I'll leave you with, and over to you, and happy to answer any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think these are two really, really crucial points in terms of where next, because, you know, as the report says, as you're saying, the needs are very different. And I think there is a need for really critical thinking in terms of when do we do what and why, you know, like what's that famous quote that technology is the answer, but what was the question? And I think that is very valid to keep in mind, especially as there's, you know, more and more solutions and more things that we could look into. Maybe, Chris, for a slightly different perspective on maybe a missing piece of the puzzle, which is maybe more at the foundational, more like at the story level. But there's also something in there in the report in terms of how do we shift resilience from a risk perspective into a growth story. And I know that we've had chats about this, and I know that you've got some great thoughts. Yeah, really curious, what is your view on that? And how do we actually help all of these firms make that shift?
Yeah, so this is something that I think in almost an unfortunate way we got off on the wrong foot with respect to some of this conversation because it's reactive to disaster, right? And if you step back and you think about resilience and what it's about from a business perspective or a service provider perspective, it's about continuity of service and business, right? That's what resilience means, right? I don't want my factory to go down. I don't want my train service to go down. I don't want water not to be delivered to my constituents. And so if you frame it as business continuity, everybody can understand why that's important from a business economics perspective or as a service provider, a public service provider. So I think if with that framing in mind, then thinking about how do I ensure my service or my business doesn't go down, and then all the things we're talking about in terms of whether it's digital twins or it's getting the data or organize, that is all in service of running a better business, of running a more streamlined, of cost savings. We've already talked about maintenance in the report. Why are bridge inspections and other inspections such a hot topic? Because it's the old way to do a bridge inspection was to send a crew of people, stop the traffic on the bridge. They all get rappelling ropes. They put hard hats on, and they go up there and measure and take measurements across the whole bridge. It takes many days. Now, you don't have to stop the traffic. You fly one drone, and you have a complete sub-millimeter accurate model of that bridge. Now you apply machine learning and say, show me where all the stresses are, show me the cracks, show me the ones that matter, show me the ones I need to go back and pay attention to. Whole thing happens with much fewer people involved from a being out at the bridge standpoint. Much more is happening back sort of in the office, if you will, right, with applying. So it's a natural place, it's an obvious place. And I think, to Raina's point, not all of these things require a lot of money. I think that's another misconception that we've got to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in a disaster relief fund because that's how we think about it. That's how businesses mitigate risk. So this became a risk reduction exercise as opposed to here's how we ensure that we're going to continue to have a business or a service. And I think this is changing. There was a lot of conversation earlier in the day around the importance of society and communities and the social cost of infrastructure or and the benefits, both, right? We see both things. And I think I'm hopeful, because again, if we step back, the definition of sustainability, right, is to balance economic, environmental, and social impacts. That's the definition, right? And resilience is about maintaining that balance across those three things. So social impact, I think, is something that is, it's not new, but it's more visible. And it gets to I think one of the big points in this survey and research is the inability to quantify the return on investment problem, right? And I think that's and how do you measure social impact quantitatively in a way that you can compare it to some other investment you're making to drive top line growth of 10%, right? I think that's where the conversation gets a little bit hung up, right? We have this tendency to do the negative. Well, what happens if we have a disaster? So again, I think the most sort of forward foot organizations don't think about it as a disaster plan as much as they think about it as this is how, this is a better way to operate this infrastructure. It's a better way to serve my constituents, and it's a less expensive way to do all of that. So I think that that really, again, speaks to, from my perspective, it's a mindset shift, right? And so one of the huge challenges is education, 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 right? And get people to understand that there's a different way to think about this stuff. And, you know, again, as I said earlier, change is hard for a lot of people, right? A lot of people resist change, and, you know, this is a change management problem, I believe. So despite my colleague Rodrigo, he's one of the 20%, right? It's sort of 80% of the people are resistant to change, and then you have 20% who are change drivers. They're the catalysts. They're the people who, Rodrigo's one of those. So when I said this comment, he said, I don't think you're right. I think humans can make change. I'm like, you can, but 80% of the people struggle with it. So
amazing. Well, in biology, you've got what are they called? Pioneering species. You know, they're the ones that move into new environments and they adapt and they change. And, you know, a few generations down, well, many generations down the line, you might have a whole new thing that you're looking at. Beautiful as is. I guess maybe a follow-on question, because I think there's also something about like the incentives. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of these firms would say, well, you know, we think we're ready, but also we'd move faster if those who finance us, you know, like the underwriters, the banks, the investors, if those requirements would come further to the front. And also maybe a follow-on question to you, Chris, like, do you think new types of projects or new approaches to infrastructure would then become more bankable in this view of growth?
yeah, so I would say this is already happening,
Oh,
right?
interesting.
There are absolutely infrastructure investment people who pay attention to resilience, who score resilience a priori, ahead of the investment. Insurance companies also are paying a lot more attention. There was an earlier panel of people talking about that. I do think there's challenges there with the finance world and the insurance world. It's always ironic to me. You go to a bank to get a loan for your house. It's a 30-year loan. You go to the insurance company because the bank says you have to have insurance, and the insurance company gives you a 1-year policy, right? And so what about the other 29 years if they, right? So banking and insurance, that's a micro example, but there's not alignment there. They're both assessing risk in some way, but they're not yet sort of joined up. So I think that's true in the sort of consumer world. It's also for sure true in the commercial world and in the infrastructure world. So yes, there are absolutely, the World Bank is also, and other NGOs are creating their own standards around resiliency and whatnot. I've certainly heard that from a number of folks on panels. So I think it's happening. It's not codified in very many places in a way that it's law or that it's a requirement, but I think that is coming. I hope. I wish it would come faster, because government regulation is a great forcing function in some ways, as long as they get it right. But again, for me, that's all about that risk, right? And so it's in everyone's interest to be trying to minimize or mitigate that as much as possible.
And I think linked to that is also like the market creation story. But I think coming back to you, Priyanka, maybe on the evidence point, because I think Chris had and Raina both had different takes on what is maybe like a similar issue around evidence. Chris, you were mentioning social impact and how do we measure social impact? And Raina, you were talking about like the evidence and the data and how do we build these gaps? What is your view on this? So like now that you've got the report, this is, you know, almost kind of like a call to action. You've identified the 4 action areas. Where do you see the biggest evidence needs? And maybe for which stakeholders? Because I guess there's the firms, but then as we were talking just now, there's also the market creation side, the investors, the financiers, the insurers, etc.
I think the answer is kind of similar for like market forces as well as firms, but firms more so. Stop managing assets, start managing systems. And as Chris said, systems of systems. So I think the point is the more interdependencies and interconnections that you view, because that's where most of the cascading impacts and risks reside, the more visibility you have and the more you can prepare your infrastructure for it. So I think that's my view. And one thing that I think for organizations and businesses is very, very important to think about is the fact that nobody owns resilience within an organization end to end. So an engineering team would look at it completely differently, to a risk team, to a sustainability team, to the operations maintenance. All of these teams will look at it in separate rooms with separate priorities, separate data sets even. So how do you bring them all together for one resilience narrative? Because if you don't have that one resilience narrative, that one system approach, these are bound to fail and fail again and again. So I think for me, it's very simple. Look at the organization who owns resilience end to end and start thinking about that and starting there.
Wow. Well, I mean, that is the missing piece of the puzzle. You're leaving us with very easy homework. It's like, tick, done in one move.
I mean, it's definitely easier said than done, but I think the starting point is that you need to, it's a mindset shift. You stop looking at things from just a very granular perspective. You need depth, but you also need that broader view of like, where are things happening and are internal teams talking to each other. So I think it goes back to their financial barriers, their technical barriers, their governance barriers, but when you look at them all closely, it's a barrier that nobody, no system, no function is actually talking to each other. And I think that's where it needs to start.
Amazing, thank you. Opening for any perspectives, questions from the audience. And I know that earlier we had perspectives from insurers, from banks, from different stakeholders in the system, other infrastructural operators. But yeah, opening anyone left in the room, any questions, any thoughts after this?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Tessa Ide from the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, C2ES. And this is something that's very related to what both of you were just touching on, but I'm hoping that you can expand on that. So, Priyanka, you spoke about how companies experience significant losses from a flooding event that takes place relatively far away from their physical assets. And Chris, you've spoken about how data silos are limiting effective adaptation and resilience efforts. So Chris, maybe for you, I'm curious how Bentley Systems is developing their software to bring in data from different sources that reflect how those physical risks are impacting those broader communities. And maybe more broadly to either of you, how can companies more generally approach infrastructure resilience in a way that accounts for all of the ways that their resilience to physical climate risk is inextricably linked with the resilience of the communities where they operate?
Yeah, good question. Thank you. So at the heart of a digital twin is this what IT people call a single source of truth. So it is where the master data, if you will, exists. And we have an open source platform called the iTwin platform as our offering in that regard. So it's open source and it's designed so that you can put any kind of data in there. So whether it's sensor data, it's an ERP data, whatever the data is that you have and what you need, and then in that environment, you then build the connectors within there. And what is necessary in order for it to work is that data has to be updated real time by any real world data that you're getting on your infrastructure. So if it's sensors, for example, it's coming in. So it's a live digital twin. The companies that are able to achieve that level of bidirectional connectivity so that their digital representation, I log into this computer over here and I see the system not as it was when it was designed, not when it was constructed, but as it is today, and I can understand exactly what's working and what isn't working, for example. That's what you want to get to with a digital twin. The highest level of sophistication is that thing is so smart, it actually can control the system itself. So if it sees a problem, it can take a corrective action. The twin, the iTwin takes a corrective action to fix something it sees in the field. So that's the sort of highest level that you get to. The problem so from a tech perspective, this is a solved problem. There's like all kinds of examples we can give of people who have chosen to do that. It's back to a little bit a mindset shift, right? Most organizations, large infrastructure companies, don't have their data in one single place, in a single source of truth like that. And so then you get the fighting. Whose system is going to win the single source of truth argument or what have you, right? It gets even more complicated in cities, right, where you have different siloed groups that have their single source of truth, but it's not lined up. So in a very simple way, from an IT perspective, this is about data management. It's about creating the single source of truth. Bentley has technology to do that. Once you create that, whether it's in Bentley's technology or somebody else's, you're off and running. And then now you're using AI, machine learning, et cetera, to do things like data transformations, because maybe the data is still coming from that system that's slightly different, but you've got to ingest it in a way that you can integrate it with the other data. And again, that's an easy thing for computers to do. That's a really easy thing for IT systems to fix, to transform data in real time. Not a problem. So, I hate to say data, but it's data. It really is. And the tech is not the problem. The tech is definitely not the problem. It's the change.
I think when we were writing the report, we also have a figure in the report. If you see it, we look at what is an asset, who owns the asset. There's a sort of Venn diagram of assets, system, network, and basically to understand how much of this lies within an organization itself versus in the supply chain with other operators, et cetera. So I think one thing is that if you start having that systems thinking and systems approach, you can understand who are the other players within the ecosystem that impact your infrastructure resilience. And then you have industry collaborations. There's obviously upstream and downstream supply chain pressures, intra-industry bodies, inter-industry bodies that can be set up. But that's the next step after you've identified that actually there are interdependencies. So like Chris said, data is the issue, and technology is there, and that's what we realized, right? That there are use cases, we can see them being used. It's just that it's not scaled, and it's not scaled because it's a governance issue. It's not necessarily, we don't have the technology issue.
Thank you so much. Maybe we've got time for one final question. Should we go to the...
Just checking that there's no one else that wants to ask something. Thank you for that. I'm Dina Zayed. I'm an independent consultant, and I've worked across sectors, both in the past and currently as part of my portfolio. And I'm really interested in not just these points that you've made, but throughout the session, and this idea of moving from managing assets to managing systems. And I just came from a session where we were having this discussion about the motivations for collaboration across different types of organizations. For nonprofits, intergovernmental organizations, for philanthropies, there's an intrinsic motivation that rests on reputation and not feeling left out. Whereas on the corporate side, there's almost a meta question of if you're too honest with one another, you lose your competitive edge, and you've been sort of speaking about this. So how do we actually tackle that, what is at heart a fundamental characteristic of private sector competition, and getting to a place where we have information sharing, systemic and strategic analysis that works across different industries, that works across different portfolios, without losing that competitive advantage?
It's a super good question, maybe try to give an example, because I think at the end of the day, the data that I'm talking about being shared, some people might argue it's generally speaking, it's what people do with the data that's proprietary and is a differentiator. The data in and of itself, depending on what the data is, it isn't as big a deal. When I think about the question that you're asking a little bit, 10 years ago, well, certainly before cell phones, right? We all could MapQuest, and we would understand how we get from point A to point B on a map. So what's the path? How do we go, right? Today, every one of us is carrying a device in our pocket that enables us to land anywhere in the world and not only understand how to get from the airport to our Airbnb or our hotel or wherever we're going, it'll tell us the shortest path time-wise, right? Because it understands traffic, it knows what's going on. It's kind of a phenomenal thing when you think about it, right? It's just using maps that exist. So it's, again, aggregating data, and then it's crowdsourcing all of us. Because we are running around with these iPhones in our pocket or these Androids or whatever that are IoT, they're sensors. They're pinging back and saying, this is how fast you're moving, right? And it's all the other users benefit from that. And so when you land and you learn that the Elizabeth line is down, take Heathrow Express, right, instead, or there's huge delays. You're told that like as you're walking out of the airport, right? If you choose to access that information, and so I think that's sort of a good example of sharing. Now, the algorithms to do the pathing are proprietary as heck, right? And the comparison and the time and so on, right? So that's, I guess, part of the answer for me, which is you have to find the places where I would argue that's a benefit to anybody who it's not a societal benefit because it's a commercial one, right? There's no government that's giving us this ability, right? It's happening because of Apple and Google and whomever, Waves and whatever your favorite one of these is. But the proprietary part is the algorithm. It's not the data. They're sourcing the same data. Same people are giving data to all those or more than one of those. Does that make sense? So I think that the short answer is what's important is the result, not necessarily how you get there. The business part, a lot of times, is how you get there from a tech perspective. I don't know if you have.
I think they're broader examples, not necessarily about infrastructure resilience per se, but you have examples within the sustainability or the climate world where you see a lot of industry collaboration, where firms are coming together to actually either put pressure on their suppliers. For example, coffee, the price has increased, 150% in a year, and a lot of big food and beverage companies are coming together to make sure that there's more sustainable, regenerative agriculture happening. But then you also have this where a lot of beauty companies in Europe, L'Oreal, etc., have gotten together to put an eco score on their products. It's not government methodology, it's nothing. These 6-7 firms came together and said, we want to be more transparent with our consumers, all of us, and they're all competing in the same category. And now they have a score where you can look at a product and say, the environmental impact of this score is A, B, C, D, or E. And I think it's that kind of thinking that we can't do sustainability or climate or resilience by ourselves. And I think that a lot of firms have gotten to the clarity that they can't. We're seeing that in partnerships with service providers, one service provider with another service provider within sustainability. We're seeing software services partnerships, software partnerships. And I think it's because everyone's moving towards an ecosystem approach. And I think given how it's transferable across different sectors and topics and concerns, I am not so worried about the differentiator per se, because I've seen enough examples where it's added value for everyone.
Thank you so much. Maybe Raina, can we go to you for any closing reflections to the questions from the audience?
Thank you very much. I just wanted to, briefly add to the last question to the responses that Chris and Priyanka have given. So I think in terms of the motivation, there was that slide that Priyanka had projected with CDRI analysis numbers, which said that globally disaster-related losses are now estimated at more than $732 billion annually, right? And the economic impact is increases by 7.5 times as much. So, I mean, now we are not talking about it from a humanitarian perspective. We are not talking about it from a, social perspective. It is also a very, for businesses and firms, it's a very commercial question in terms of their business continuity, in terms of their profitability. And as part of our CDRI report last year, what we found that you'll find a lot of examples across the globe where firms and businesses have actually started focusing on resilience because they were affected by certain disasters and climate risks, and they continue to be affected. And how so then that's the reason how they have sort of been motivated to take action on the resilience front. So in a nutshell, I feel that when it comes to businesses and firms, resilience probably needs to be addressed and taken as seriously the way the ESG framework, for example, came into place. So there are sustainability officers, Chris is one. There is how companies and businesses are looking at ESG, the same level of investment, same level of following through is required on the resilience front as well. So I'll stop here, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Raina, for joining us online. Thank you from my end. And just to close off, Jesper would also like to share some thanks. But first, let's give a round of applause to the panelists.
Yes, thank you very much, and thanks, Karina, for guiding us through that last hour. Just a couple of thanks, really. It comes down to that, and then there are a couple of drinks. Thanks to Bentley Systems for hosting us. It's a very rich day. I feel like I've been in a tumble dryer, and I haven't even been outside since this morning. Thanks for staying. I know there's lots of exciting football games, so I know that there are some people who left here. They're now hogging various pubs and so on. Thanks for everyone staying online. Thanks to the team that made this happen. There's a lot of work and planning that goes into doing something like this, for keeping the conversation so relevant and focused. And finally, thanks to you guys for showing up, because it really does make a difference if you show up to something like this and you're leaning in and you're having the conversations. So thank you for that. I also want to point out this piece of art here, which is a fantastic summary of the day and all the discussions. It's okay to take photographs, right? Okay, so you should go and take a picture or just stand there and be impressed. I don't know how you guys do it. I mean, I have a problem keeping two thoughts in my head at the same time. Again, finally, thank you. I hope I didn't forget anyone. Now there are some drinks down there. Thanks for making this day so special, and hopefully see you next year. Thank you.
See that